Hello, tonight. You drift toward a world that exists long before crowded cities, before kings carve their names into stone, and before written words quietly begin shaping the fate of empires. Somewhere beneath pale skies and slow-moving rivers, the earth prepares itself with remarkable patience. In the silence of ancient floodplains, the earliest foundations of civilization wait like unopened letters resting beside calm water. A cool evening settles across vast river valleys where silver streams wander through quiet plains beneath pale clouds. You move beside water that barely seems to hurry, carrying soft layers of fertile soil across the land through endless centuries. The horizon feels wide and dreamlike, almost like a sleeping giant resting beneath fading sunlight and calm, drifting winds. The rivers curve across broad plains with the calm patience of something ancient and deeply familiar. Marsh grasses sway beside shallow banks while distant birds cross slowly overhead in fading formations. Fine sediment gathers silently beneath the water, shaping fertile earth year after year. Somewhere nearby, a lonely frog croaks stubbornly, sounding oddly like a tired office worker answering late Monday emails. So, before you get completely comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy what we're creating here. And while the ancient rivers continue their quiet journey through sleeping plains, feel free to share your local time and location in the comments below. Somewhere tonight, another listener may also rest beneath soft lamplight, hearing these same waters drift gently through darkness. Quiet stories often travel farther than rivers carrying reeds and fertile mud. Now, slowly dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan, letting the steady hum of the air fill the room. And in that gentle rhythm, we quietly step into tonight's journey together. Long before cities appear beside these rivers, the valleys already move through dependable rhythms, shaped by stone, water, and climate. Seasonal floods spread dark, fertile soil across wide plains before retreating beneath warmer skies. Later, geological studies in Mesopotamia uncover these ancient cycles preserved within sediment layers like quiet pages from an unread history. You wander beside untouched riverbanks where no walls, roads, or temples interrupt the peaceful landscape. Water, sunlight, wind, and time shape the earth in perfect balance. Fine sediment settles gently after floods, forming fertile plains destined to support future civilizations. For now, the valleys remain beautifully empty. A drifting branch circles lazily like someone avoiding chores all Sunday afternoon. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow steadily through landscapes that appear endless beneath pale blue skies. In later centuries, scholars call this region Mesopotamia, meaning the land between rivers. But tonight, there are no names yet, no borders, and no voices describing ownership. Only moving water defines the world. The rivers carve graceful channels through soft earth while reeds whisper quietly beside the marshes like careful storytellers speaking after midnight. Scientists studying ancient pollen preserved within sediment uncover subtle signs of changing climates across these broad floodplains. Wetter centuries encourage marsh grasses and thick vegetation to spread beside the rivers, while drier periods slowly alter waterways and migration paths. The environment never feels chaotic here. Instead, the land breathes steadily through long, peaceful natural cycles. High above the valleys, clouds drift lazily across enormous skies carrying distant rain toward cold mountain ranges. Seasonal snowmelt feeds the rivers below, sustaining wetlands rich with fish, birds, and wild plants. Everything follows rhythms older than memory itself. Even the sunlight arrives softly each morning, like a thoughtful neighbor bringing warm soup during difficult weather. You begin noticing how silence dominates this ancient landscape in ways unfamiliar to the modern world. There are no engines, no electric lights, and no hurried footsteps crossing crowded streets. Only natural sounds fill the air, rustling reeds, moving water, distant insects, and occasional thunder rolling across empty horizons. The absence of human noise creates a strange comfort, almost like sitting inside a quiet library before anyone else arrives for the day. The fertile plains owe their existence to repeated flooding over immense stretches of geological time. Each flood deposits fresh minerals gathered upstream, renewing the soil with extraordinary consistency. Later, farming societies depend entirely upon these nutrient-rich sediments for survival. Yet the rivers themselves ask for nothing in return. They continue flowing with calm indifference, rather like a shopkeeper who keeps lending pencils despite knowing nobody ever returns them. Archaeologists studying ancient flood deposits discover that these river systems remain stable across remarkably long stretches of time. The waterways occasionally shift course, yet they rarely change violently overnight. Instead, fertile plains evolve gradually through erosion and accumulation, creating conditions ideal for future settlement. Stability becomes the quiet foundation supporting early agriculture and organized communities. As evening settles across the plains, pale mist gathers above slow-moving water beneath fading silver light. Fish disturb the dark surface briefly before vanishing beneath reeds along muddy banks. Wild animals approach carefully to drink while soft footprints fade quietly into wet earth. Nothing here appears permanent except gradual change unfolding patiently through centuries like calm breathing. Far in the future, researchers studying Mesopotamian climate records identify periods of heavy rainfall followed by long droughts shaping future settlement patterns. These environmental shifts eventually influence farming, migration, and water storage across the region. Tonight, however, the valleys remain untouched by human decisions. The rivers continue flowing calmly through darkness with steady and timeless persistence. You slowly sense how geography prepares the world for civilization long before cities rise beside these waters. Fertile soil gathers quietly near dependable rivers, while broad plains allow movement across great distances. The land waits patiently without demanding settlement directly. Somewhere nearby, a sleepy bird crashes awkwardly into the reeds with the elegance of someone missing the final evening bus home. Moonlight spreads gently across endless river valleys where dark marsh grasses shimmer beside quiet reflections beneath the stars. No monuments, roads, or written language disturb the peaceful landscape yet. Still, hidden within these fertile plains rests the future foundation of cities, trade, and empires. Civilization remains absent, though the conditions supporting it already sleep silently beneath the soil. The ancient rivers continue their quiet journey through darkness, carrying moisture, minerals, and possibility across the sleeping earth. Long before writing appears upon clay tablets, the land records history through sediment, climate cycles, and erosion layered beneath the plains. The valleys remember everything without words, and beneath pale skies, the future waits patiently beside calm, untouched water. The grasslands spread quietly across the floodplains beneath skies softened by thin, drifting clouds. Warm seasons bring gentle rain that feeds endless marshes beside the winding rivers, while cooler years slowly reshape the boundaries of wetlands and dry earth. You walk through a landscape still untouched by cities or farms, where nature organizes itself patiently. Every change arrives so gradually that centuries pass almost unnoticed beneath the pale horizon. Tall reeds sway beside shallow pools where frogs, insects, and water birds move through thick marsh vegetation. The rivers overflow occasionally, leaving behind rich dark soil that settles across the plains in smooth, fertile layers. Future civilizations will depend entirely upon this earth, though no human hands shape it yet. A lonely crane, standing motionless in the water, somehow resembles a tired waiter waiting for customers after midnight. The climate of these ancient valleys changes slowly through long, natural cycles driven by rainfall, temperature, and seasonal flooding. Modern sediment analysis later reveals alternating wet and dry phases hidden beneath layers of ancient soil. These shifts influence vegetation patterns across Mesopotamia for thousands of years before written records exist. The earth quietly keeps its own memory beneath the floodplains, recording history through mud, pollen, and buried traces of vanished seasons. You move carefully through open grasslands stretching beyond sight beneath wide, silent skies. Herds of wild animals follow familiar migration routes shaped entirely by water availability and seasonal temperatures. Gazelle, wild cattle, and other grazing creatures travel steadily across the plains searching for fresh vegetation near rivers and wetlands. Their movement appears calm and purposeful, rather like commuters navigating familiar roads without needing signs or complicated directions. Scientists examining fossilized pollen preserved deep within marsh sediments uncover remarkable evidence of these ancient migrations. Different plant species expand or retreat according to rainfall and climate conditions, indirectly revealing where animals likely gathered during changing seasons. Even without human observers, the landscape leaves subtle clues behind. Nature writes softly into the earth itself, although nobody yet exists to read the message hidden beneath layers of mud and reeds. Morning mist drifts low above the wetlands while sunlight slowly warms the shallow water along the riverbanks. Fish move quietly beneath the surface, disturbing reflections that shimmer like scattered silver coins across the marshes. Wild birds rise suddenly from the grasses before circling back into the calm air again. Somewhere nearby, an irritated insect buzzes with the confidence of a tiny creature convinced the entire valley belongs exclusively to him. The fertile plains continue expanding through centuries of flooding that renew the soil again and again. Rivers carry minerals from distant mountains before spreading them carefully across lowland valleys during seasonal overflow. This steady process gradually creates ideal agricultural conditions long before farming begins. The land prepares itself patiently for future settlers without any deliberate plan, as though the earth quietly understands possibilities hidden far beyond the present moment. You begin noticing how perfectly balanced the ecosystem feels across these vast floodplains. Beside the ancient rivers, marsh grasses naturally filter water, while seasonal floods restore nutrients to fertile soil year after year. Animal migration spreads seeds across enormous distances, encouraging new growth after shifting weather patterns. Even the rivers seem perfectly satisfied following ancient paths without attending unnecessary efficiency meetings. Far upstream, snowmelt from distant mountains feeds the rivers through dependable seasonal cycles shaping the floodplains below. Wetter centuries expand marshlands rich with vegetation and wildlife, while drier periods slowly narrow certain waterways across the valleys. Later, archaeological climate studies confirm these patterns through Mesopotamian sediment cores. Long before written history, the environment already determines where future civilizations will survive. You pause beside a shallow wetland, where soft mud preserves delicate footprints left by passing animals during the night before. Tiny insects skim across the water while reeds bend gently beneath the breeze. No roads, walls, or settlements appear anywhere nearby. The world still belongs completely to nature. A crooked turtle slips awkwardly into the marsh like someone escaping painfully uncomfortable conversation. As centuries drift quietly forward, the valleys remain stable enough to encourage thicker plant growth along fertile riverbanks. Wild grains begin spreading naturally across floodplains where seasonal waters create favorable conditions for growth. These grasses thrive without cultivation or organized farming. Future agriculture already exists here in hidden form, resting quietly inside ecosystems untouched by human hands or planned harvests. The wetlands provide shelter for countless species, adapting carefully to seasonal environmental changes across the plains. Birds migrate through the valleys during cooler months while grazing animals follow fresh vegetation beside winding rivers. Fossil evidence later suggests these migration patterns remain surprisingly stable over prehistoric time. Nature repeats familiar rhythms patiently, like an old storyteller returning often to comforting and well-loved tales. You wander beside calm waterways reflecting pale afternoon sunlight beneath endless open skies stretching beyond distant marshes and grasslands. The silence feels complete, yet quietly alive with hidden movement among reeds and shallow pools. Without human settlements, the plains remain open across enormous distances. Water shapes every rhythm here, feeding soil, guiding animals, and sustaining ecosystems without borders or organized authority. Later, historians often focus upon kings, armies, and monuments, yet none of those systems could exist without earlier environmental stability. Fertile soil, predictable flooding, and dependable water quietly prepare the conditions necessary for permanent settlement across these valleys. Civilization begins long before cities rise. It starts here among wetlands shaped patiently through thousands of years. Evening settles softly across the plains, as cooler air drifts through wetlands carrying the scent of damp reeds and dark soil. Shadows stretch slowly over shallow water, while distant animal calls echo through fading light. The rivers continue flowing with remarkable calmness beneath darkening skies. Time itself seems slower here, unfolding carefully like pages inside an ancient treasured book. You begin sensing how deeply this landscape depends upon changing rainfall and shifting temperatures across long, natural cycles. Wetter seasons expand marshlands, while prolonged dryness gradually reshapes rivers and migration routes through the plains. Yet these transitions rarely appear violent or chaotic. Nature adapts carefully over time, like an orchestra changing tempo without interrupting the quiet melody beneath it. The ancient world remains unwritten and unnamed beneath enormous silent skies stretching endlessly above fertile valleys and marshes. Rivers nourish the plains, while climate cycles continue shaping the land through rhythms older than memory itself. Soon, humans will arrive carrying tools and ambitions. But tonight, the earth still rests peacefully beneath drifting clouds and endless patient stars. The first settlements appear quietly beside the Tigris and Euphrates, where fertile soil and dependable water support permanent communities across the plains. Mud brick homes rise gradually in clustered groups connected by narrow pathways shaped through daily movement. Smoke drifts from cooking fires while reeds sway beside irrigation channels. Human life finally settles carefully into the valleys with patient determination. You walk through one early settlement beneath soft morning light while workers shape wet clay carefully with practiced hands. Bricks dry slowly beneath warm sunlight before becoming walls, storage rooms, and protection against seasonal flooding. Everything feels modest, yet remarkably organized. Even the houses seem politely arranged beside one another, like neighbors avoiding unnecessary disagreements about fences and property lines. The city of Uruk expands gradually across southern Mesopotamia during the 4th millennium BCE, becoming one of humanity's earliest large urban centers. Archaeological excavations later uncover mud brick architecture, temples, workshops, and organized residential districts beside river channels. Urban life emerges slowly through repeated routines of farming, construction, trade, and cooperation, shaped across generations beside ancient waterways. You notice how daily life revolves around repeated cycles performed with remarkable consistency beside the rivers. Farmers tend irrigated grain fields while laborers repair walls softened by floodwater and rain. Merchants exchange goods near crowded storage buildings filled with barley and woven baskets. Nearby, a stubborn donkey complains loudly with the dramatic energy of someone offended by tiny inconvenience. The mud brick structures of early Mesopotamian settlements require constant repair because seasonal weather gradually erodes exposed surfaces. Yet this weakness creates long-term stability, since rebuilding becomes part of ordinary communal life rather than sudden disaster. Generations repair the same walls repeatedly across centuries. Archaeologists later uncovered these layered settlements, as artificial hills called tells formed through continuous habitation. You move through the streets of Uruk where workshops hum quietly beneath broad skies filled with drifting dust and smoke. Potters shape clay vessels for grain, oil, and water, while textile workers weave cloth beside shaded courtyards. The settlement already displays growing social organization beyond temporary village life. Different responsibilities slowly create the foundations supporting structured urban civilization throughout Mesopotamia. Within temple complexes, administrators begin managing food supplies, labor duties, and agricultural production, with growing complexity throughout the settlement. Grain from nearby farms must be counted carefully before redistribution across the city, while expanding livestock herds require reliable tracking. Memory alone slowly becomes insufficient. Information, much like river water, eventually needs dependable, organized channels to flow properly. You watch small clay tokens appear within administrative systems, representing quantities of grain, sheep, cattle, and other important resources. Different shapes correspond to different goods, allowing officials to record transactions physically before formal writing develops. These objects function as early accounting tools supporting urban organization. The process feels surprisingly practical, like ancient spreadsheets created by people thankfully spared forgotten passwords and software updates. Archaeologists studying Mesopotamian settlements uncover thousands of clay tokens preserved beneath layers of debris and collapsed structures. Some remain sealed inside hollow clay containers called bullae, protecting transaction records from loss or tampering. Gradually, impressions pressed into wet clay replace the physical tokens entirely. Symbols begin carrying meaning independently, quietly preparing humanity for the later invention of writing. You begin sensing how repetition shapes daily life within these expanding river settlements across Mesopotamia. Irrigation canals require constant clearing while planting and harvest follow dependable seasonal rhythms beside fertile waterways. Families bake bread, repair homes, shape pottery, and exchange goods through familiar routines repeated every year. Stability becomes the invisible structure supporting society through countless ordinary actions performed carefully over generations. The rivers remain central to every part of settlement life throughout the fertile Mesopotamian plains. Seasonal. Floods deposit rich soil while irrigation canals direct water toward agricultural fields beyond growing city walls. Without organized irrigation, large urban populations could never survive within the dry surrounding landscape. Human society now begins cooperating directly with natural systems through patience, planning, and disciplined attention toward water management. You pause beside a crowded storage courtyard where workers carry grain baskets beneath warm afternoon sunlight. Clay jars stand stacked carefully against mud brick walls while administrators inspect deliveries near shaded entrances. Urban life grows increasingly complex beyond what memory alone can manage comfortably. Even the goats wandering nearby seem strangely suspicious of administrative efficiency, inventory systems, and anyone carrying official-looking clay tablets. Excavations at Uruk uncover evidence of specialized labor, organized religion, long-distance trade, and growing administrative hierarchy emerging together during this remarkable period. Monumental. Temple platforms rise above the surrounding plains, signaling expanding social complexity. Yet daily life still revolves around water, food, shelter, and cooperation. Civilization grows gradually from ordinary routines, repeated patiently beneath shifting skies and seasonal change. You wander beside narrow canals reflecting warm evening light between rows of mud brick homes and storage buildings. Voices drift softly through open courtyards while smoke rises gently into cooling air above the settlement. Life here follows calm, predictable rhythms shaped by work and water. The rivers no longer cross empty plains alone, but organized communities slowly growing together through shared routines. The earliest systems of symbolic accounting appear simple beside later literature and royal inscriptions, yet these clay markings transform human history forever. Information begins leaving the fragile limits of personal memory and entering durable physical form preserved through generations. Knowledge can now survive absence, distance, and death itself. Small impressions pressed carefully into clay quietly reshape the future direction of civilization across Mesopotamia. You notice how naturally this transformation grows from practical necessity rather than artistic ambition or philosophical thought. Nobody invents early record-keeping to create poetry at first. Expanding settlements simply require dependable systems for organizing resources, labor, and obligations. Writing begins as administration before becoming storytelling. Civilization discovers that counting grain accurately may influence history, as much as armies or monuments ever could. Night settles softly across Uruk, while oil lamps flicker behind mud brick walls beside dark canals carrying slow-moving water through the city. Somewhere nearby, clay tokens rest carefully beside grain baskets and bundled reeds inside quiet storage rooms. Tomorrow, the same routines will continue beneath pale skies. Yet, within these repeated cycles, humanity quietly learns how to preserve memory outside the human mind itself. Beyond the growing settlements, the rivers continue flowing steadily through darkness across plains shaped by thousands of years of natural history. But now, human hands also reshape the landscape through canals, walls, organized labor, and written records. Mud brick cities rise where silence once ruled completely. And within small clay pieces pressed gently by careful fingers, written civilization slowly begins taking form. The cities beside the Tigris and Euphrates continue growing steadily as trade, farming, and labor become increasingly difficult to organize through memory alone. Around 3200 BCE, in the bustling settlements of southern Mesopotamia, small marks, pressed carefully into wet clay, begin transforming administration forever. These wedge-shaped symbols, later called cuneiform, emerge quietly from ordinary economic needs. Civilization slowly discovers how to preserve information beyond the fragile limits of spoken conversation. You sit beside a low clay table within a busy storage building where scribes press reed styluses gently into damp tablets. Each angled. Impression represents quantities of grain, livestock, oil, or labor obligations moving through the city's expanding economy. The process appears calm and methodical rather than artistic. Nobody realizes yet that these tiny marks will eventually preserve entire histories. One exhausted scribe stretches his aching fingers like someone regretting a very ambitious knitting project. The earliest cuneiform symbols evolved directly from older counting systems that relied upon clay tokens and impressions. Instead of storing physical objects inside sealed containers, administrators now record information directly onto flat clay surfaces. This innovation saves time, reduces confusion, and simplifies increasingly complex transactions. Archaeological. Discoveries at Uruk reveal thousands of these tablets preserved beneath layers of settlement debris, offering remarkable insight into humanity's earliest experiments with organized written communication. You notice how practical these early tablets appear beside baskets of grain and rows of clay storage jars. Most contain records of deliveries, taxes, livestock counts, or labor assignments rather than stories or poetry. Writing begins not through imagination, but through administration. The city requires dependable systems for tracking resources moving between fields, workshops, and temples. Civilization learns that information itself can become infrastructure, supporting society as quietly and reliably as canals supporting irrigation water. The reed stylus creates distinctive wedge-shaped marks because scribes press its cut tip into soft clay at careful angles. Over time, these repeated impressions form recognizable patterns representing objects, quantities, and eventually sounds within spoken language. The system grows gradually more sophisticated across generations of scribes working within temples and administrative centers. What begins as simple accounting slowly develops into one of humanity's first complete writing systems beneath the broad Mesopotamian sky. You walk through crowded market areas where merchants exchange grain, wool, fish, and pottery, while scribes sit nearby recording transactions onto fresh clay tablets. The sounds of bargaining mix with footsteps, animal calls, and splashing water from nearby canals. Everything feels increasingly interconnected through these new records. Even distant trade relationships become easier to maintain when information survives accurately beyond immediate conversation and fading human memory. Archaeologists studying early cuneiform tablets discover that many record highly detailed economic information, including measurements of barley, beer allocations for workers, and livestock inventories. Some tablets even preserve lists of professions existing within urban society thousands of years ago. Writing quietly reveals the structure of civilization itself. Through these surviving clay documents, forgotten administrators continue speaking softly across immense stretches of time without ever intending future audiences to overhear them. You begin sensing how revolutionary this transformation truly becomes for organized society. Spoken agreements depend entirely upon trust, repetition, and memory, all vulnerable to misunderstanding or loss. Written records create stability across distance and time by preserving exact details physically within durable materials. A grain shipment recorded today can still be verified weeks later. The clay tablets function almost like ancient receipts, although thankfully nobody needs to call customer service afterward. The temples of Mesopotamian cities grow increasingly powerful because they oversee religion, economic administration, and food distribution throughout expanding urban societies. Scribes within these institutions become respected specialists trained carefully in reading and writing cuneiform signs. Literacy remains limited, yet its influence spreads steadily everywhere. Writing allows centralized authority to coordinate labor, manage resources, and sustain organized systems across large territories. You pause beside shelves lined with drying clay tablets while sunlight filters softly through narrow openings in thick mud brick walls. The tablets appear ordinary despite their enormous significance for daily urban life. Some record grain deliveries from nearby farms, while others track workers assigned to canal maintenance. These simple marks quietly support entire cities spread across fertile Mesopotamian plains beneath shifting skies. As cuneiform develops further, its uses gradually expand beyond economic administration into religion, law, diplomacy, and royal authority throughout Mesopotamian civilization. Priests record temple offerings while rulers commission inscriptions celebrating victories and construction projects. Written language slowly enters nearly every institution shaping urban society. What begins as practical accounting evolves into a framework connecting communities through standardized information preserved carefully upon clay tablets. You watch, a young apprentice practicing cuneiform signs repeatedly upon damp clay beneath an older scribe's patient supervision. Learning the system requires years of concentration and disciplined study to master symbols representing goods, sounds, and ideas. Nearby, another apprentice accidentally smears fresh clay with his sleeve and immediately resembles someone realizing they mistakenly replied, all to a company email. Archaeological excavations across Iraq continue uncovering cuneiform tablets, preserved for thousands of years beneath dry soil and collapsed buildings. Entire archives emerge from ancient Mesopotamian cities containing legal contracts, religious hymns, administrative accounts, and astronomical observations. Some tablets even preserve mathematical calculations. The ancient world slowly begins collecting knowledge in durable permanent form, supporting future learning and historical continuity across generations. You wander beside evening canals where soft reflections shimmer beneath torchlight drifting from nearby administrative buildings. Inside cool mud brick halls, scribes press careful symbols into wet clay while workers deliver grain gathered from surrounding fields. The city increasingly depends upon written systems operating almost invisibly beneath ordinary life. Most people may never read these tablets directly, yet nearly everyone experiences the order they quietly maintain. The remarkable thing about early writing is that it first emerges not as literature or personal expression, but as practical infrastructure, supporting increasingly complex societies. Growing populations require dependable systems for organizing resources, labor, trade, and agreements across larger territories. Writing functions initially like canals, roads, or storage buildings. It quietly supports civilization while remaining mostly unnoticed by ordinary people living beside. Mesopotamia's patient rivers. You begin understanding how deeply writing connects itself to stability within expanding urban societies across the ancient Near East. Accurate records reduce disputes, preserve agreements, organize labor, and strengthen institutions across generations. Clay tablets allow information to survive longer and travel farther than spoken memory alone. Night settles softly across the cities, while shelves of drying tablets rest beside quiet canals, preparing silently to shape empires yet unborn. The cities of Mesopotamia continue expanding beside the rivers as temples grow into powerful administrative centers, guiding nearly every aspect of urban life. These large mud brick complexes oversee grain storage, irrigation maintenance, labor, organization, and religious ceremonies beneath towering walls decorated with colored clay and woven banners. Writing now flows steadily through these institutions like water through canals. Quiet records pressed into clay begin holding entire societies together with remarkable efficiency and stability. You enter a temple courtyard during the cool hours of early morning, while workers carry baskets filled with barley toward shaded storage rooms. Scribes sit nearby, recording deliveries onto damp clay tablets with calm concentration beside stacks of drying documents. The atmosphere feels orderly rather than chaotic. Everyone appears connected through carefully repeated systems. Even the goats wandering across the courtyard somehow move with the confidence of employees who absolutely believe they deserve management positions. The temple institutions of southern Mesopotamia become economic engines supporting rapidly growing urban populations. Priests and administrators supervise food redistribution, agricultural planning, and irrigation projects extending far beyond city walls into the surrounding countryside. These responsibilities require enormous amounts of organized information preserved accurately across seasons and generations. Writing no longer serves isolated transactions alone. It now supports large interconnected systems coordinating thousands of people throughout the fertile river valleys. You walk beside irrigation canals stretching outward across flat agricultural land nourished by carefully controlled river water. Labor crews repair embankments while farmers monitor fields of barley waving gently beneath warm sunlight. Without coordinated maintenance, flooding or drought could easily threaten entire harvests. The temples organize these projects through written schedules, labor assignments, and stored records. Civilization increasingly depends upon administration functioning as steadily and invisibly as the rivers themselves beside the plains. Archaeological excavations at the ancient city of Ur uncover thousands of clay tablets preserving detailed, economic records from daily Mesopotamian life. These documents track livestock counts, grain deliveries, wages, taxes, and temple inventories with extraordinary precision. Many tablets appear surprisingly ordinary despite their immense historical value. Through them, forgotten workers, merchants, and officials continue whispering softly across 4,000 years about barley shipments, missing sheep, and carefully measured beer allocations. You pause inside a cool storage hall where clay tablets rest neatly upon wooden shelves beside sealed jars of grain and oil. The air smells faintly of dust, reeds, and damp earth left by recent floods. Every shelf holds information vital to city stability. Nearby, an exhausted scribe sighs heavily while counting livestock yet again today. The growth of administrative writing quietly transforms how power operates across Mesopotamian society and expanding urban populations. Leaders no longer depend entirely upon spoken agreements or personal relationships to govern effectively. Written records preserve decisions beyond conversation while supporting taxation, labor obligations, and planning. Clay tablets maintain institutional continuity even when rulers change or floods reshape nearby countryside. You wander through crowded market streets where merchants exchange wool, copper, pottery, and dried fish beneath woven shade coverings beside busy canals. Riverboats arrive steadily carrying goods between distant cities connected through Mesopotamian waterways. Scribes record transactions near docks and storage buildings to support reliable trade. Writing functions like invisible thread connecting separate communities through shared systems and communication. The river networks of Mesopotamia become essential transportation routes supporting commerce and political integration across expanding territories. Boats carry grain, timber, stone, and luxury goods between cities otherwise isolated by difficult terrain. Written records accompanying shipments help maintain trust throughout growing economic networks. Civilization becomes increasingly interconnected, through water and clay together beneath broad skies and changing seasons. You notice how deeply routine shapes daily existence within these organized urban systems beside the rivers. Farmers deliver grain according to seasonal schedules while laborers maintain canals beneath temple supervision. Administrators record inventories using standardized methods learned through years of training. Stability emerges from countless, ordinary actions repeated consistently, although thankfully requiring fewer confusing instruction manuals and missing replacement parts than modern machinery. Around 2334 BCE, Sargon of Akkad rises to power and establishes one of history's earliest, centralized empires across Mesopotamia. His rule unites multiple city-states beneath a single political authority, extending across large territories connected through administration, trade, and military organization. Writing becomes essential for governing this expanding realm. Orders, tax records, and official communications move between distant regions through networks of scribes operating beside the rivers and roads of Akkadian control. You travel northward beside dusty riverbanks where officials representing Akkadian authority inspect shipments arriving from distant settlements and trading posts. Standardized administration now connects cities once governed independently through local rulers and temple systems. Clay tablets preserve instructions, inventories, and political decisions across remarkable distances. Even the donkeys carrying messages seem slightly overwhelmed by imperial paperwork and administrative responsibility. Sargon's empire demonstrates how writing strengthens centralized governance across territories too large for any ruler to supervise personally. Administrators throughout the empire maintain records supporting taxation, labor coordination, military supplies, and communication between distant cities. Political authority increasingly depends upon written documentation alongside military power. Empires require memory extending beyond human speech, and clay tablets quietly provide dependable continuity. You stand beside the Euphrates during evening light while riverboats drift through golden reflections beneath broad, silent skies. Somewhere downstream, scribes record grain shipments using the same signs used here beside the water. Shared writing systems create consistency across enormous distances. Rivers carry goods between settlements, while writing carries organization, authority, trust, and communication through expanding interconnected civilizations. The excavated tablets from Ur reveal fascinating details about ordinary Mesopotamian life beyond famous kings and military campaigns. Records describe workers receiving bread and beer rations, merchants exchanging textiles, and labor crews repairing irrigation canals. Some tablets even preserve mathematical calculations for accounting and land measurement. Civilization depends not only upon rulers but upon countless ordinary people performing practical work every day. You begin sensing how writing transforms from useful invention into invisible infrastructure supporting nearly every institution. Within Mesopotamian society, temples, markets, irrigation systems, and imperial administration increasingly rely upon reliable records preserved through standardized symbols pressed carefully into clay. Most citizens never write personally, yet writing still shapes their lives constantly through taxation, organized labor, trade, and food distribution systems. Night settles softly across Mesopotamian cities, while lamps flicker behind mud brick walls beside dark canals and quiet river docks. Inside temple archives, thousands of clay tablets rest carefully upon shelves preserving the movement of goods, labor, and authority throughout the region. The rivers continue flowing beneath distant stars, while silent clay marks teach civilization how to organize itself across generations and vast territories. The growing kingdoms of Mesopotamia begin depending upon writing for far more than counting grain or tracking trade. Expanding territories now require organized systems capable of managing taxes, military supplies, labor obligations, and communication across enormous distances. Clay tablets travel steadily between cities, carrying instructions and records beneath official seals. Administration flows through written language like water through canals, shaping society quietly while rulers extend authority beyond the reach of their own voices. You travel along dusty roads where royal messengers move carefully between distant settlements carrying tablets wrapped securely in cloth and leather. Each message contains information essential to maintaining order across lands filled with different customs and languages. Governors, scribes, and military officials rely upon these records constantly. Even the horses appear slightly impatient, with bureaucracy stamping their hooves like travelers trapped in unusually slow airport security lines. As empires expand across Mesopotamia, rulers discover that spoken commands alone cannot govern diverse populations scattered across vast territories. Reliably, written administration creates consistency by preserving laws, taxes, military obligations, and official decisions in durable form. The state gradually functions through documents maintained by trained scribes within administrative centers beneath thick mud brick roofs lined carefully with clay tablets. You enter a provincial administrative hall where officials record harvest taxes delivered from nearby farming villages beside the Euphrates River. Workers carry baskets of barley while scribes calculate quantities using styluses pressed rhythmically into wet clay. Every transaction contributes to wider imperial systems connecting distant cities together. The atmosphere feels strangely calm despite the complexity involved. Somewhere nearby, a tired accountant squints suspiciously at grain totals like someone reviewing a restaurant bill after an expensive dinner. Royal inscriptions become increasingly important tools for projecting authority across territories containing many languages and cultural traditions. Kings commission monumental carvings beside roads, temples, and public spaces announcing victories, laws, construction projects, and divine legitimacy. These inscriptions standardize political messages throughout vast regions. Even those unable to read recognize symbols of royal authority carved deeply into stone. You pause beside a towering stone inscription standing beneath bright sunlight near a crowded city gate filled with travelers and merchants. People entering the settlement pass slowly beside carved symbols describing the ruler's accomplishments and authority. The monument functions as both communication and performance. Writing now shapes political identity itself, allowing empires to speak continuously long after voices disappear. The Akkadian and later Babylonian administrations depend heavily upon networks of scribes trained carefully in standardized writing systems. These officials preserve continuity between rulers, maintain archives, and ensure commands remain understandable across generations and distant regions. Written administration grows increasingly independent from individual personalities. States learn how to remember themselves through organized documentation rather than fragile, imperfect oral tradition alone. You walk through a crowded military storage yard where workers inventory weapons, grain supplies, and transport animals, assigned to royal campaigns. Scribes record every detail carefully onto tablets stored inside sealed archives nearby. Armies require astonishing amounts of organization long before battles ever begin. Without accurate records, supply systems collapse quickly. One grumbling soldier adjusts heavy equipment with the weary expression of someone absolutely certain meetings could have been shorter and fewer. Around 1754 BCE, the Babylonian king Hammurabi commissions one of the world's earliest surviving legal codes carved prominently onto a large stone stele. The Code of Hammurabi contains hundreds of laws governing trade, labor, marriage, property, crime, and social obligations throughout Babylonian society. The text presents law not as personal opinion, but as standardized written authority preserved publicly for reference across the kingdom. You stand quietly before the great stone stele, where rows of cuneiform signs descend carefully beneath an image of Hammurabi receiving authority from the sun, god Shamash. The polished black surface reflects soft afternoon light, while citizens move nearby through crowded streets and market stalls. The laws carved here remain fixed and visible rather than spoken privately behind closed doors. Writing transforms justice itself into something permanent, organized, and publicly recognizable. The Code of Hammurabi reveals much about early urban society, including labor regulations, commercial standards, family structures, and legal punishments. Some laws appear harsh by modern standards, yet the code also demonstrates growing efforts toward predictable legal procedures within complex societies. Written law creates expectations extending beyond personal relationships alone. Civilization increasingly depends upon shared systems preserved consistently through text rather than memory or individual interpretation. You notice how written law gradually changes ordinary behavior throughout cities and villages connected to Babylonian authority. Merchants negotiate contracts more carefully while property agreements gain formal structure through recorded documentation. Disputes increasingly reference established legal texts preserved physically upon stone and clay. Even local arguments probably sound more dramatic when someone points confidently toward actual carved laws. The spread of literacy among professional scribes strengthens centralized administration throughout Mesopotamia and neighboring territories. Training schools teach standardized cuneiform signs, legal formulas, accounting systems, and diplomatic language necessary for governance. Scribes become essential intermediaries, connecting rulers with officials, merchants, priests, and military commanders. Entire political systems quietly depend upon their ability to preserve accurate information across vast distances. You wander through a scribal school where young students practice copying legal phrases repeatedly into damp clay beneath careful supervision. Shelves of older tablets line the walls beside baskets filled with reeds and water jars. The atmosphere feels disciplined, yet peaceful. One distracted student stares dreamily through the doorway with the unmistakable expression of someone mentally planning early retirement already. The reliance upon written administration gradually transforms how people understand authority within Mesopotamian civilization and expanding empires. Earlier societies depend heavily upon spoken agreements, local customs, and personal loyalty. Now, written systems standardize expectations across territories despite differences in language or tradition. Law, taxation, trade, and military organization increasingly function through preserved documentation supporting long-term institutional continuity. You begin sensing how deeply writing shapes the rhythm of everyday life across these ancient imperial systems beside the rivers. Farmers deliver taxes according to recorded obligations, while merchants rely upon written contracts protecting trade agreements between distant cities. Soldiers receive supplies through organized inventories maintained carefully within archives. Even religious ceremonies follow preserved formulas recorded by temple officials upon clay tablets. Evening settles softly across Babylon, while lamps flicker beside canals flowing dark beneath enormous city walls. Inside archives and administrative halls, shelves of clay tablets preserve laws, taxes, military inventories, and royal decrees connecting distant regions through organized governance. The rivers continue carrying water across fertile plains, while writing carries authority itself through empires increasingly dependent upon recorded words. The great river civilizations continue expanding outward as writing strengthens administration across growing territories connected through waterways and trade routes. Empires spread gradually along fertile valleys where transportation, communication, and agriculture remain reliable beneath familiar seasonal cycles. Written records help rulers coordinate distant cities confidently. Yet geography still determines where expansion succeeds and where deserts, mountains, or seas resist imperial ambition patiently. You travel beside crowded river docks where merchants load grain, copper, timber, and woven textiles onto broad wooden boats bound for distant settlements. Nearby, scribes document cargo with practiced precision, while officials inspect seals pressed carefully into damp clay. Every shipment depends upon written agreements. Empires expand not only through armies but also through inventories, schedules, and accounting systems moving steadily beside river currents. The Nile River supports a civilization developing remarkable administrative sophistication during Egypt's Old Kingdom around 2686 to 2181 BCE. Along this narrow fertile corridor bordered by immense desert, Egyptian rulers organize labor, taxation, agriculture, and monumental construction through systems of written documentation preserved by trained scribes. Hieroglyphic writing appears upon monuments, papyrus scrolls, and official records throughout the kingdom. The river itself becomes the great organizing path guiding nearly every aspect of Egyptian life. You stand near the construction site of a massive pyramid, while thousands of laborers move stone blocks beneath bright sunlight shimmering across the desert plateau. Contrary to older myths, archaeological evidence suggests many workers are organized laborers receiving food, housing, and medical care rather than enslaved populations. Scribes carefully document supplies and labor assignments. Beside temporary camps, one exhausted worker wipes dust from his face with the expression of someone questioning several unfortunate career choices. The pyramids of the Old Kingdom require astonishing levels of coordination involving quarrying, transportation, engineering, food distribution, and seasonal labor organization. Writing becomes essential for managing these complex operations across many years of construction. Hieroglyphic inscriptions and administrative records help maintain consistency throughout enormous projects stretching across generations. Monumental architecture rises not through chaos or improvisation, but through carefully organized systems supported quietly by endless layers of written documentation. You walk slowly beside long storage halls filled with grain jars, tools, linen, bundles, and copper equipment destined for royal building projects. Officials inspect inventories while scribes record deliveries using reed brushes upon papyrus and carved inscriptions upon stone. The atmosphere feels orderly despite the tremendous scale of activity surrounding the pyramids. Civilization, increasingly, depends upon administration functioning smoothly behind visible achievements. Even greatness requires someone patiently counting supplies before sunrise every single morning. As Egyptian influence expands along the Nile, writing helps unify regions separated by considerable distance, yet connected naturally through the river corridor. Royal decrees, tax records, religious texts, and labor reports circulate through administrative centers supporting centralized authority beneath the pharaoh. Hieroglyphs serve not only practical purposes but also symbolic ones, reinforcing divine kingship through carefully displayed inscriptions carved deeply into temples and monuments across the kingdom's fertile landscape. You begin noticing how rivers repeatedly shape the boundaries of early civilizations across the ancient world. Mesopotamia develops between the Tigris and Euphrates, while Egypt grows beside the Nile's predictable flooding cycles. Waterways provide transportation, fertile soil, and communication routes supporting large populations and centralized governments. Human ambition may dream widely, yet rivers often determine where empires survive successfully. Trade routes crossing deserts, coastlines, and mountain passes gradually connect distant societies exchanging goods, technologies, and administrative practices. Writing becomes increasingly valuable for managing interactions between unfamiliar regions and languages across expanding networks. Contracts, inventories, diplomatic messages, and tribute records travel beside caravans and merchant ships. Civilizations grow interconnected through communication systems preserved physically within clay tablets, inscriptions, and papyrus documents. You pause beside a caravan preparing to cross dry desert terrain toward distant settlements beyond fertile river valleys. Camels and donkeys stand loaded with textiles, copper tools, grain, and pottery, while merchants review written inventories carefully before departure. Travel remains difficult despite growing administrative sophistication. Nearby, one especially. Stubborn donkey refuses cooperation with impressive determination, perfected through years of personal philosophical resistance. The stability provided by writing allows rulers to govern territories far larger than personal relationships alone could support successfully. Officials stationed in distant provinces depend upon standardized records and instructions maintaining taxation, labor systems, and military coordination. Empires increasingly function through institutions rather than individual memory. Writing preserves continuity across generations even when rulers die, cities decline, or trade routes slowly change. You travel northward beside a river valley where fertile farmland narrows gradually toward rocky hills and harsher terrain beyond the floodplains. Past certain boundaries, irrigation becomes difficult, while transportation grows less reliable across uneven ground. Expansion slows naturally despite imperial ambition. Mountains, deserts, forests, and coastlines continue shaping political possibilities with quiet authority throughout the ancient world. In Egypt, surrounding deserts provide remarkable protection from invasion, while also limiting agricultural expansion beyond the Nile floodplain. Mesopotamian cities enjoy fertile land, yet remain vulnerable to conflict across open terrain connecting neighboring regions. These geographical differences influence political systems, military strategies, and cultural development. Civilizations emerge not only from invention, but also from landscapes offering opportunity and limitation together. You notice how writing increasingly serves as a stabilizing force within territories containing communities separated by distance and local tradition. Taxation systems become more predictable while trade agreements gain consistency across expanding networks. Administrative records preserve continuity through political transitions that might otherwise create confusion. Civilization gradually begins trusting written documents almost as deeply as earlier generations trusted spoken promises and custom. Archaeologists studying pyramid construction settlements uncover detailed records describing worker organization, food distribution, medical treatment, and labor schedules from ancient Egypt. These discoveries reveal sophisticated administration supporting monumental achievements often viewed only through royal power and symbolism. Behind every great pyramid stand countless ordinary tasks coordinated carefully through years of planning, labor, patience, and practical organization. You wander beside evening riverbanks where boats drift slowly beneath fading sunlight carrying grain, stone, papyrus, and official messages between distant settlements and cities. Rivers remain the great arteries of early civilization, while writing functions like a nervous system connecting separate regions into organized political structures. Beyond, fertile valleys, deserts, and mountains still shape every empire's possibilities, with patient authority. Night settles softly across the Nile and Mesopotamian plains, while scribes continue recording taxes, labor assignments, and trade inventories beneath flickering lamplight inside administrative halls. Great kingdoms expand through waterways and written systems linking distant populations beneath centralized rule. Yet rivers, deserts, and coastlines remain older and stronger than dynasties, quietly defining civilization's limits beneath the stars. The great river civilizations continue balancing environmental stability with human ambition, yet climate gradually shifts beneath familiar daily routines across Mesopotamia. Rainfall patterns change while harvests become less predictable during prolonged dry periods preserved within ancient sediment layers. Political power, once strengthened by fertile soil and organized administration, now faces quieter pressures carried through drought, wind, and diminishing resources. You walk across dry farmland where irrigation canals still wind through broad plains, though the surrounding earth appears increasingly brittle beneath warm afternoon sunlight. Farmers inspect thinning crops while officials quietly calculate reduced grain deliveries near crowded storage buildings. Nothing collapses immediately. Nearby, a tired ox pauses dramatically beside the road like an employee seriously considering whether retirement might finally solve everything. Modern climate studies examining Mesopotamian sediment cores reveal evidence of significant drought periods during the late 3rd millennium, BCE. Agricultural productivity likely declines across territories supporting the Akkadian Empire as dust deposits increase and pollen records show changing vegetation patterns. Nature quietly alters foundations beneath stable political systems. Empires eventually discover that administration alone cannot negotiate successfully with weather and rainfall. You stand beside the Euphrates where water levels appear lower than earlier seasons remembered by older farmers nearby. Reeds still sway gently beside the river, yet wider stretches separate the water from surrounding fields. The landscape changes subtly without dramatic catastrophe. Civilization often transforms this way, through countless small adjustments accumulating, quietly before anyone fully recognizes larger historical shifts unfolding beneath ordinary routines. The Akkadian Empire, established centuries earlier through centralized administration and military expansion, gradually weakens beneath prolonged environmental pressures affecting agriculture and political stability. Strained harvests disrupt taxation, food distribution, labor organization, and governance across provinces connected through river systems. Written records still circulate between cities, yet maintaining the systems they support becomes increasingly difficult during worsening regional conditions. You move through crowded marketplaces where merchants discuss delayed shipments arriving, from drought-affected northern territories and weakened farming regions. Grain prices rise while traders search for alternative resources and transportation routes across neighboring lands. Commerce adapts slowly through negotiation and improvisation rather than disappearing entirely. Nearby, one frustrated merchant counts cracked storage jars like someone discovering their favorite bakery suddenly closed forever without warning. Archaeological evidence suggests many ancient trade systems remain surprisingly resilient during periods of environmental instability and regional stress. Instead of collapsing immediately, commercial networks reorganize through altered routes, substitute goods, and local adaptation. Coastal settlements, fertile lowlands, and river ports gain importance when interior agricultural zones experience prolonged drought. Human societies adjust gradually rather than disappearing suddenly from history. You travel toward coastal trading centers where sea routes provide alternatives to increasingly unstable inland agriculture and weakened harvests. Ships carry timber, metals, textiles, and preserved foods between settlements, adapting carefully to changing environmental conditions. Ports become gathering places for merchants, migrants, and officials seeking stability beside dependable waterways. The atmosphere feels quieter now, shaped more by endurance than expansion. Climate fluctuations influence political power throughout Mesopotamia, because agricultural production depends heavily upon rainfall patterns and river management systems. When harvests weaken across large territories, centralized governments struggle maintaining taxation, military supply networks, and administrative authority. Environmental change rarely acts alone, yet it intensifies existing political tensions and competition over limited resources throughout vulnerable regions beside the rivers. You pause beside a partially abandoned irrigation canal where cracked, earthmarked sections no longer receiving dependable water flow. Nearby villages continue surviving through smaller local systems organized around remaining fertile land and stable rivers. Communities adapt carefully rather than surrendering completely. Somewhere nearby, a stubborn goat confidently eats part of an official document like a harsh critic reviewing government planning strategies. The weakening of the Akkadian Empire demonstrates how environmental pressures gradually reshape regional power balances without requiring sudden catastrophe or dramatic invasions alone. Some cities decline, while others remain active through access to water, trade routes, or favorable geography. Political authority fragments unevenly across Mesopotamia, as communities reorganize around surviving resources. The ancient world shifts slowly like rivers adjusting patiently through erosion. You wander beside marshlands where fishing communities continue working calmly despite broader political uncertainty affecting inland territories and declining cities. Boats drift through reeds while smoke rises gently from cooking fires near mud brick homes beside the water. Rivers and wetlands increasingly provide stability within changing landscapes. The earth quietly teaches civilization where survival remains possible beneath difficult skies and uncertain seasons. Written records from later Mesopotamian periods preserve hints of hardship, migration, and instability, connected to drought and resource strain across the region. Yet they also reveal remarkable continuity within administrative traditions surviving political change. Scribes continue documenting trade, labor, and taxation even as kingdoms weaken. Clay tablets quietly preserve institutional memory, while rulers and borders gradually shift around them. You notice how human adaptation unfolds through practical decisions repeated patiently across generations facing environmental uncertainty. Farmers relocate toward wetter regions while merchants establish new partnerships along coastal routes and surviving river corridors. Political centers shift toward areas offering greater reliability. Civilization behaves less like collapsing stone and more like water finding new channels through changing landscapes. The ancient Near East remains interconnected, despite disruptions caused by environmental stress and political fragmentation throughout surrounding territories. Trade routes linking Mesopotamia, Anatolia, the Levant, and Egypt continue functioning through modified patterns shaped by geography and resources. Cultural exchange persists beside economic adaptation. Humanity rarely stops communicating completely, although shipping schedules probably become significantly more frustrating during prolonged drought years. You stand beneath fading evening light beside a harbor where ships rock gently against wooden docks carrying cargo toward distant coastal settlements. Sailors secure ropes while merchants inspect inventories beneath flickering lanterns reflected upon dark water. The atmosphere feels cautious yet determined rather than hopeless. Nearby, an exhausted dock worker stretches painfully while reconsidering every life choice involving barrels and maritime employment. Over time, new political structures emerge around regions capable of sustaining agriculture, trade, and stable populations through changing climate conditions. River valleys, fertile coastlines, and protected harbors become increasingly important centers for reorganized economic and administrative networks. Environmental pressure reshapes civilization gradually instead of ending it completely. Power shifts carefully according to water, geography, and human adaptability across generations. Night settles softly across the ancient Near East, while rivers continue flowing beneath dark skies through marshes, ports, and surviving farmlands. The great Akkadian system weakens gradually under environmental strain preserved silently within layers of dust and sediment. Yet boats still travel, trade routes still breathe, and scribes still write carefully upon clay beside waters carrying civilization patiently forward. New kingdoms rise gradually across the ancient Near East as older empires weaken under shifting climates, changing trade routes, and regional competition. These emerging powers inherit writing systems developed centuries earlier, adapting them to local languages and administration. Knowledge flows forward through surviving records, trained scribes, and diplomatic customs preserved within clay tablets moving between courts. You travel through a bustling Anatolian city where merchants, soldiers, and officials move along stone streets beneath cool mountain air drifting from rugged hills. This Hittite kingdom stands as a major Late Bronze Age power. In royal archives, scribes still use cuneiform adapted from Mesopotamia. One young apprentice sighs over complex symbols like homework that refuses to age or become optional. The Hittites build their kingdom in Anatolia during the 2nd millennium BCE, controlling key trade routes linking Mesopotamia, the Levant, and the Mediterranean. Though their language differs from Akkadian, they adopt cuneiform for diplomacy, administration, and treaties because it already connects international systems. Writing now operates between civilizations, allowing competing states to negotiate. power through shared bureaucratic traditions across borders. You enter a royal archive filled with neatly arranged clay tablets stored beneath cool stone walls. Officials record treaties, trade agreements, tribute obligations, and diplomatic letters exchanged between distant kingdoms separated by mountains, rivers, and seas. Each document carries political weight far beyond its size. Civilization depends increasingly on written communication, even if diplomats sometimes wish meetings came with shorter speeches and better refreshments. One of the most remarkable examples of international correspondence from the Bronze Age appears in the Amarna letters, discovered centuries later in Egypt. These clay tablets preserve diplomatic messages exchanged during the 14th century BCE between Egyptian pharaohs and rulers from Babylon, Assyria, Mitanni, Canaan, and the Hittite kingdom. Written primarily in Akkadian cuneiform, the letters reveal a surprisingly interconnected world, linked through formal communication and careful political negotiation. You sit quietly beside a flickering oil lamp while a royal scribe reads aloud, a diplomatic message arriving from a distant kingdom beyond the deserts and mountains. The letter discusses marriage alliances, trade shipments, military concerns, and requests for gold delivered respectfully through polished ceremonial language. The atmosphere feels calm yet deeply strategic. Entire international relationships now depend upon carefully chosen words, pressed gently into clay by skilled hands working far from battlefields. The Amarna letters reveal fascinating details about how rulers address one another during the late Bronze Age. Powerful kings refer to each other as brother, emphasizing diplomatic equality between major states despite underlying competition and suspicion. Lesser rulers write with noticeably greater submission toward stronger kingdoms like Egypt. Writing becomes both communication and performance, carefully shaping political relationships through tone, formality, and preserved records capable of traveling enormous distances across the ancient world. You notice how writing increasingly bridges cultural and linguistic boundaries throughout these interconnected civilizations. Akkadian cuneiform functions almost like an international diplomatic language understood by trained scribes across many kingdoms. A letter written in one city can be interpreted accurately hundreds of miles away by officials who may never speak the sender's native tongue. Information now moves more freely between civilizations than armies or merchants alone could ever manage consistently. The Hittites use written treaties extensively to formalize alliances, define borders, and regulate political obligations between states. One famous example survives between the Hittite king Hattusili III and the Egyptian pharaoh Rameses II following the Battle of Kadesh around 1259 BCE. This agreement becomes one of the earliest known international peace treaties preserved in written form. Diplomacy itself grows increasingly dependent upon documents capable of surviving beyond temporary spoken promises. You stand within a quiet ceremonial hall where envoys exchange formal greetings beneath carved stone walls lit by soft afternoon sunlight. Scribes carefully record each clause of an agreement while officials observe beside tables covered with clay tablets and seals. The atmosphere feels solemn yet practical. Peace, trade, and alliance now require documentation as much as armies require weapons. Nearby, a bored guard struggles to stay awake during detailed treaty discussions. As kingdoms compete for influence across trade routes and resource-rich territories, writing allows increasingly complex diplomatic systems to function without constant warfare between neighboring powers. Messages travel between courts discussing marriages, tribute, military threats, and economic cooperation. Written communication preserves continuity between rival rulers separated by geography. Civilizations gradually learn negotiating through records carrying authority, memory, and intention across distance. You wander through crowded harbor markets, where merchants from distant regions exchange copper, tin, textiles, ivory, and fragrant oils beneath woven coverings fluttering gently in warm sea air. Different languages surround you constantly, yet written accounting systems organize transactions between unfamiliar cultures. Writing reduces uncertainty within expanding trade networks, rather like ancient paperwork surviving international business without requiring forgotten digital passwords. Archaeological discoveries from Hattusa, the Hittite capital, uncover thousands of clay tablets preserving legal codes, diplomatic correspondence, religious rituals, and administrative records from the Bronze Age. These archives demonstrate how deeply writing becomes embedded within government and statecraft. Political systems increasingly rely upon preserved documentation managing taxation, trade, military logistics, and foreign policy throughout the ancient Near East. You begin sensing how writing transforms power itself during this remarkable historical period beside expanding trade networks. Earlier civilizations used records mainly for administration and resource management, yet texts now connect competing kingdoms through diplomacy and communication. Letters maintain alliances, while treaties stabilize borders across generations. Civilization no longer develops separately but through interconnected systems of exchange and negotiation. The Bronze Age international system remains fragile despite impressive communication networks linking major kingdoms across the Eastern, Mediterranean, and Near East. Rivalries continue over territory, trade access, and political influence throughout connected regions. Yet writing allows conflict and cooperation to coexist within structured diplomatic relationships. Even enemies exchange messages, negotiate treaties, and preserve agreements recognized across cultural boundaries and distant capitals. You pause. Beside the shoreline at dusk while ships drift slowly toward crowded ports carrying goods, ambassadors, and sealed letters between powerful kingdoms beneath bronze-colored evening skies. The sea reflects fading light, while distant voices echo across wooden docks and stone warehouses. Nearby, one weary messenger protects a bundle of tablets with the anxious devotion usually reserved for fragile wedding cakes. Night settles softly across the interconnected kingdoms of the late Bronze Age, while scribes continue copying treaties and diplomatic letters beneath flickering oil lamps inside royal archives. Across rivers, mountains, and coastlines, writing carries alliances, negotiations, and political memory between civilizations deeply connected despite rivalry. Through these enduring symbols pressed into clay, humanity slowly learns communicating across borders without raising swords. The interconnected world of the late Bronze Age begins shifting under mounting pressures from conflict, migration, environmental strain, and weakening trade systems. Great kingdoms that once exchanged diplomatic letters and luxury goods gradually lose stability across the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Yet civilization does not vanish entirely. People continue moving, trading, adapting, and carrying knowledge with them. History flows onward through migration and cultural exchange like rivers quietly changing course after heavy seasonal rains. You walk through a coastal settlement where unfamiliar accents mingle beside crowded harbor markets filled with travelers, arriving from distant shores. Merchants unpack cargo while refugees search for work, and sailors discuss unstable conditions affecting once powerful kingdoms inland. The atmosphere feels uncertain, yet strangely alive with movement and possibility. One exhausted dock worker balances pottery jars with the weary confidence of someone who absolutely regrets skipping breakfast before beginning a 12-hour shift. Around the 12th century BCE, many Bronze Age civilizations experience major disruption across the eastern Mediterranean world. Mycenaean palaces weaken, Hittite authority collapses, and several important cities suffer destruction or abandonment. Historians still debate the precise causes behind these transformations, though climate change, warfare, migration, and economic instability likely combine together over time. Rather than a single sudden catastrophe, the Bronze Age collapse appears increasingly like a long, complicated period of regional reorganization. You stand beside the ruins of a once busy administrative hall where broken walls now open toward empty courtyards beneath drifting dust and pale sunlight. Clay tablets lie buried beneath collapsed roofs while weeds push carefully through cracked stone floors. The silence feels deep but not permanent. Nearby villages continue surviving beyond the ruins, adapting slowly to changing political realities. Civilization rarely disappears completely. Instead, it scatters, reshapes itself, and quietly continues elsewhere in altered forms. As centralized Bronze Age kingdoms weaken, populations redistribute across stable coastal regions, fertile river valleys, and defensible settlements throughout the ancient Near East. Trade routes shift gradually while local communities develop new political structures suited to changing conditions. Knowledge survives through craftsmen, merchants, priests, and scribes carrying traditions between regions despite instability and disruption. You travel westward along Mediterranean coastlines where ships continue sailing between ports despite weakening imperial systems inland. Smaller trading communities thrive beside natural harbors protected from inland disruptions affecting former palace centers. Sailors exchange stories, goods, and technologies while adapting to new commercial realities. Nearby, a seasick passenger leans against a railing with the expression of someone reconsidering every adventurous life choice. Among the most influential maritime traders of this era are the Phoenicians, skilled seafarers originating from the Levantine coast. Their cities, including Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, become major commercial hubs connecting the Mediterranean through expanding trade networks. Instead of territorial empires, Phoenician influence spreads through navigation, exchange, and communication. Their ships carry timber, textiles, glass, dyes, and a remarkably efficient writing system. The Phoenician alphabet simplifies earlier writing traditions by using a smaller set of symbols representing sounds rather than complex combinations of signs and syllables. This innovation makes writing more flexible and accessible for trade and communication across diverse regions. Unlike cuneiform or hieroglyphs, the alphabet requires less specialized training, allowing writing to spread beyond administrative institutions into broader commercial networks across the Mediterranean world. Communication becomes faster and more flexible. Information now travels more lightly between traders and cities, reshaping everyday exchange alongside growing maritime commerce. You sit beside a busy harbor tavern where merchants scratch quick notes onto wax tablets while discussing shipments arriving from Cyprus, Egypt, and distant Western colonies. The alphabet enables faster communication across languages and distances. One cheerful sailor proudly demonstrates writing skills while misspelling something important enough that nearby companions immediately burst into laughter over their drinks. Beauty. Phoenician writing system influences later alphabets, including Greek and eventually Latin traditions that shape much of the modern written world. Through trade rather than conquest alone, cultural practices move steadily across Mediterranean sea routes. Ports become centers of exchange where technologies, religions, art, and administration blend gradually through daily interaction among diverse traveling communities. At the same time, iron technology spreads across the Near East and Mediterranean regions, reshaping economies and warfare. Bronze production depends on long-distance trade in copper and tin, making it vulnerable to disruption. Iron ore is more widely available, and although harder to work, it becomes increasingly practical. Geography again guides technological change, beneath shifting ancient landscapes. You walk through a blacksmith's workshop where sparks rise into dim air, while artisans hammer heated iron upon stone anvils. The tools and weapons produced appear rougher than bronze, yet far more sustainable for fragmented trade conditions. Practicality replaces luxury across many regions. Nearby, an apprentice drops hot metal and begins hopping across the floor in sudden, unplanned athletic panic. As populations migrate and trade routes shift, cultural boundaries grow increasingly fluid across the Mediterranean and Near East. Settlements mix traditions carried by merchants, refugees, and travelers. Religious practices blend, artistic styles merge, and languages absorb new vocabulary through constant contact. Civilization develops not through isolation, but through continuous interaction across changing political and environmental landscapes. You notice how coastlines gain importance during this transformation, providing stability, communication, and opportunity when inland regions face disruption. Sea routes remain resilient pathways connecting distant societies through trade and migration. The Mediterranean functions like a vast moving marketplace where ideas travel alongside cargo beneath shifting winds and open skies stretching endlessly. Across the horizon, archaeologists studying early Iron Age settlements find continuity beneath apparent collapse. Pottery styles evolve gradually rather than disappearing, while older religious traditions persist beside new influences. Writing. Systems adapt instead of vanishing. Human societies reorganize through persistence and flexibility. Civilization survives because ordinary people continue farming, trading, building, and telling stories even during uncertain transitions. You pause beside the shoreline at sunset, where fishing boats return slowly toward harbor lights glowing against darkening hills. Merchants unload cargo while travelers prepare journeys toward distant coasts beyond the horizon. The atmosphere feels less centralized than earlier empires, yet more connected through many smaller networks. A gull steals food from a distracted sailor with impressive professional confidence. Night settles gently across the Mediterranean world, while ships continue crossing dark water carrying alphabets, iron tools, songs, beliefs, and memories between changing civilizations. The old Bronze Age kingdoms fade gradually into history, yet their knowledge survives through migration and adaptation rather than complete disappearance. New cultures emerge from shared movement across seas and coastlines beneath unfamiliar stars. And through trade, travel, and written language, humanity continues weaving itself quietly into larger connected worlds. The once powerful cities of the Bronze Age gradually settle into silence beneath drifting dust, collapsing walls, and centuries of slow erosion across the ancient Mediterranean and Near East. Mycenae and Ugarit remain standing as damaged reminders of earlier worlds. Wind, rain, roots, and soil quietly cover streets once filled with merchants, scribes, and officials over long passing centuries. You walk slowly through the ruins of Mycenae, where broken stone walls rise unevenly beneath pale afternoon light, while grasses move softly in the breeze. Empty gateways once guarding royal palaces now open toward silent hillsides filled with insects and olive trees. The city feels peaceful after centuries without rulers. Nearby, a stubborn goat climbs ancient stones with complete confidence in its own version of property law. The Mycenaean civilization flourishes across mainland Greece during the late Bronze Age, developing palace-centered societies connected through trade, administration, and warfare. Within these palaces, scribes record inventories, labor assignments, and economic activity using a script now known as Linear B. Archaeologists later decipher the script during the 20th century, revealing valuable administrative records hidden for thousands of years beneath collapsed palace ruins and layers of accumulated earth. You stand within the remains of a palace archive where clay tablets once rested carefully upon wooden shelves. Inside, administrative rooms overlooking surrounding valleys. Fires destroying parts of these palaces accidentally preserve many tablets by baking the clay hard enough to survive long after wooden structures disappear. Destruction itself becomes preservation. Civilization sometimes leaves its clearest traces through accidents, rather like discovering an old shopping list unexpectedly tucked inside an ancient family photograph album. The Linear B tablets from Mycenaean Greece contain mostly administrative information rather than heroic stories or philosophical reflections. They record grain supplies, livestock counts, religious offerings, military equipment, and distributions of labor among palace workers. These ordinary details become extraordinary precisely because they survive. Through them, forgotten bureaucracies continue whispering softly across millennia about practical concerns shaping daily life within Bronze Age societies balanced carefully between organization and vulnerability. You move through quiet courtyards where cracked stone pathways disappear beneath patches of moss and wildflowers growing carefully between fallen blocks. Birds nest within collapsed walls, while tree roots slowly widen ancient fractures hidden beneath the soil. Nature reclaims abandoned spaces without hurry or anger. The earth simply continues its patient work after political systems fade. Even the wind moving through ruined corridors sounds gentler now, like distant voices softened by enormous stretches of time. The coastal city of Ugarit, located in present-day Syria, once serves as a thriving commercial and diplomatic center, linking Mediterranean trade networks during the Late Bronze Age. Its archives preserve thousands of tablets written in several languages and scripts, reflecting remarkable cultural diversity within the ancient world. Yet, around 1200 BCE, Ugarit suffers destruction during the broader regional upheavals affecting many Bronze Age civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. You wander beside shattered harbor structures where ships once unloaded copper, grain, timber, and luxury goods from distant kingdoms. The sea moves calmly against the shoreline beneath fading sunlight, indifferent to vanished trade agreements and royal correspondence. Pottery fragments crunch underfoot while grasses grow through abandoned streets. Nearby, a lizard darts across. Stone, strangely pleased with rent-free waterfront property, archaeologists excavating Ugarit uncover remarkable archives containing diplomatic letters, trade records, religious texts, and literary works preserved beneath collapsed buildings. Some tablets remain inside rooms where scribes apparently stopped mid-work during the city's final days. These discoveries provide intimate glimpses of a civilization interrupted but not erased. Written records wait patiently underground until future generations learn again to hear their quiet voices. You notice how history survives unevenly through physical traces scattered across landscapes shaped by erosion, weather, and vegetation. Stone monuments endure longer than wood or cloth, while clay tablets outlast papyrus in dry conditions. Entire generations vanish except for broken tools, buried walls, or fragments of writing preserved by chance. Human memory depends on ordinary materials surviving long enough for rediscovery centuries later. The collapse of palace systems across parts of the Mediterranean does not erase all cultural continuity, yet administrative writing declines sharply in affected regions. In Greece, Linear B disappears for centuries after Mycenaean palaces fall. Without centralized scribal training and archives, writing becomes difficult to sustain. Civilization grows quieter, relying more on oral tradition while older records rest beneath ruins and shifting soil. You sit beside a fallen stone wall, warmed gently by afternoon sunlight, while distant waves echo from the coastline below. Wild. Plants grow through cracks once kept clean by palace servants carrying inventories and messages. Nature does not destroy civilization deliberately. It simply continues growing, eroding, and changing long after human systems stop maintaining carved spaces. Excavation layers within ancient cities reveal settlements rising, declining, rebuilding, and disappearing repeatedly across centuries. Archaeological tells contain stacked histories where civilizations rest above one another, separated by thin layers of ash, dust, or collapsed brick. Time accumulates physically beneath the earth. Every ruined wall becomes foundation material for future structures, while forgotten objects sink into soil beneath unaware generations. You notice how silence dominates these abandoned places differently from untouched river plains of earlier chapters. Ancient valleys remain quiet because civilization has not yet arrived. These ruins feel quiet because civilization has already passed through and moved elsewhere. The difference lingers in the air itself. Nearby, an owl watches from a broken archway with solemn dignity supervising archaeological work. The rediscovery of sites like Mycenae and Ugarit through modern archaeology transforms broken stones and buried tablets into historical memory once again. Scholars carefully reconstruct lost societies from fragments of architecture, writing, pottery, and environmental evidence. History becomes a dialogue between absence and survival. The ancient world rarely explains itself fully, instead leaving scattered clues beneath layers of earth and vegetation. You walk slowly through twilight, settling across ruined streets where grasses ripple beside collapsed walls and half-buried, stairways leading nowhere visible anymore. Former inhabitants remain absent except through marks pressed into clay, shaped stones, and foundations resisting erosion after thousands of years. Civilization fades physically, yet traces endure stubbornly. The land remembers quietly through fragments even when names and governments disappear completely. Night settles over Mycenae, Ugarit, and forgotten settlements buried beneath hills, forests, coastlines, and drifting desert sands. Roots spread through abandoned courtyards while rain smooths carved stone under changing skies. History survives through material echoes preserved within ruins and buried archives. Through silent fragments of clay, dust, and weathered walls, the ancient world continues whispering softly across the darkness of time. The rivers continue flowing long after kingdoms fade, carrying reflections beneath skies unchanged by the rise and fall of empires. Writing endures as humanity's quiet mechanism for preserving memory across generations, evolving from Mesopotamian clay tablets to alphabets, print, and digital systems that carry information forward through time. You sit beside a calm riverbank at dusk while reeds sway softly in cooling air and distant stars begin appearing above darkening water. Somewhere far away, modern cities glow with electric light, yet the ancient impulse to record memory remains deeply familiar. Humans still write lists, stories, laws, messages, and dreams through generations, while a sleepy fisherman untangles a knot, exhaustedly negotiating with fate itself silently. The earliest scribes of Mesopotamia could never have imagined how far writing would travel across cultures and centuries. Their records of grain, livestock, and labor evolve into complex systems of communication. Each generation adapts the medium, but the intent remains constant: to preserve thought beyond spoken memory. You walk through the ruins of an ancient archive where broken tablets rest beneath dust and moonlight. Modern museums now protect similar artifacts behind glass, giving forgotten voices new life. Human memory survives not because civilizations last forever, but because fragments continue moving forward into future hands. Writing becomes humanity's most reliable instrument for preserving continuity across generations separated by war, migration, environmental change, and political collapse. Oral traditions remain powerful, yet written systems endure with greater precision across centuries. Laws, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, literature, and administration accumulate through recorded knowledge, allowing civilization to build upon memory layer by layer beneath shifting historical skies. You notice how every writing system reflects both innovation and inheritance at once. Cuneiform grows from counting tokens, alphabets emerge from earlier symbols, and modern scripts still carry echoes of ancient forms shaped thousands of years ago beside rivers and coastlines. Communication evolves continuously rather than appearing suddenly. Nearby, a student yawns dramatically over notes with universal exhaustion, familiar across civilizations. The geological timescale surrounding human civilization remains almost impossible to fully comprehend. Rivers carve valleys over millions of years, while mountains rise and erode through processes far beyond any empire's lifespan. Compared to these rhythms, civilizations occupy brief moments. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Akkad, Mycenae, and Babylon appear, flourish, and disappear like passing weather beneath the vast patience of geological time. You stand upon a rocky hillside, overlooking broad plains where ancient rivers wind slowly through fertile land beneath pale morning light. Beneath your feet lie countless layers of forgotten settlements stacked across thousands of years. Beneath those rest even older geological layers shaped before humanity exists. The Earth remembers differently from civilization, carrying pressure, water, and time in silent, patient memory. Climate records preserved in ice cores, sediment deposits, and fossil pollen reveal environmental cycles extending far beyond written history. Wet periods shift into dry phases while coastlines move gradually and ecosystems reorganize over millennia. Human societies adapt within these patterns rather than controlling them fully. Civilization shapes landscapes briefly, yet climate and geology continue according to rhythms older than kings or monuments. You wander beside coastal cliffs where waves break steadily against rock formations carved through immense spans of erosion, beneath changing skies. Below the surface, fragments of pottery and buried walls rest beneath sand carried by tides across centuries. The sea remains patient. A seabird screams at the wind like a frustrated supervisor dissatisfied with weather and ocean management decisions. Despite the immense scale of geological time, writing gives humanity a unique form of endurance across civilizations. Ideas recorded thousands of years ago still influence law, language, mathematics, religion, and political organization today. The Code of Hammurabi, Egyptian records, Phoenician alphabets, and Mycenaean tablets all contribute threads continuing long after their creators vanish beneath ancient skies. You begin sensing how writing functions like a bridge suspended across time itself, connecting distant generations. A tablet pressed by a Mesopotamian scribe 4,000 years ago can still communicate meaning today through translation and study. Individual lives disappear, yet recorded thought remains accessible. Civilization achieves continuity impossible through speech alone, expanding human memory beyond biology into durable physical form. Modern archaeologists, historians, linguists, and climate scientists continue reconstructing ancient worlds from evidence scattered across deserts, ruins, libraries, and sediment layers. Each recovered inscription or buried archive adds another fragment to humanity's long story. The past remains incomplete, yet never entirely unreachable. Civilization listens for faint echoes preserved in materials resilient enough to survive fire, water, war, and centuries of erosion. You sit quietly beside the remains of an old harbor, while evening settles across calm water reflecting distant stars overhead. Boats once carried grain, copper, treaties, alphabets, and stories between civilizations now reduced to archaeological traces beneath soil. Yet, information never truly stops moving. Human beings continue recording experiences, preserving knowledge, and sending words outward toward unknown readers beyond their own brief lifetimes. The written word survives because it adapts through new materials, technologies, and languages while preserving connections to older traditions. Clay tablets become parchment, printed books, and digital archives stored within global networks. Each transformation changes form without ending continuity. Writing remains ancient and modern simultaneously, carrying human memory forward through shifting chapters of civilization beneath the slow movement of geological time itself. You notice a deeper silence settling across the landscape, wider than the quiet of abandoned ruins earlier in history. It is shaped by rivers, mountains, coastlines, stars, and vast stretches of time beyond human measure. Civilizations rise and fade gently within it, like brief campfires against darkness. Nearby, water continues flowing steadily through reeds, exactly as it did long before cities learned to write. The earth will continue turning long after modern nations change beyond recognition, just as ancient empires once disappeared into buried stone and scattered fragments of clay. Rivers will shift course, coastlines will erode, forests will grow and retreat beneath changing climates. Yet somewhere, words will likely remain preserved within whatever forms humanity creates next. Writing endures because memory itself longs to travel farther than any single lifetime quietly allows. Now the night grows deeper, and the ancient river plains rest beneath countless unseen stars drifting slowly above sleeping fields and ruined cities. The scribes are gone, the empires silent, the palaces weathered into dust beneath patient skies. Still, their marks endure softly through time, carried forward like water moving endlessly toward distant seas. And in that quiet flow of written memory, humanity continues whispering gently across the centuries into the dark. The script comes to a close. Thank you all for listening.